This is on Collins Aerospace Industries. What they have done was they've just scrubbed the spacesuit that they're building. So now NASA has nobody else to build spacesuits because according to this article, Axiom is only constructing spacesuits for the Mars missions. And it was Collins Aerospace that was contracted to build the spacesuits for this new Artemis mission. Now they have no spacesuit, so now they're back yet another year, what they said. So now there won't be anything in 2024, this year, there won't be anything next year, and there won't be anything the year after that, because they still have to get the Lunar Gateway Station constructed before they could send humans to the lunar surface. But right now, we're talking about Artemis 2, the one that's supposed to have, left already. Well, that is delayed 2 years now because of this. Now, if this was so easy to do 55 years ago, and they just kept producing all these spacesuits because we've seen them on that rack, there's about 25 Apollo spacesuits on that rack that guy's putting up. All those spacesuits, and yet you're telling me they can't make one single spacesuit. Not one of these companies that can make a spacesuit, that can produce a spacesuit that's going to protect those astronauts in that environment of space. Because there's no belts, there's no Van Allen belts around the moon, so they're going to get bombarded by everything. Then we have another problem with these particles, these little microparticles that are going to be slamming into that spacesuit because the odds of it, which we calculated last week, are going to be pretty high that they're going to get impacted. Yeah.
Deadly is the word. Just simply deadly.
Yeah, they're going to be impacted by these particles and they're going to be dead. Exactly. So now again, we're back to the drawing board. If it was so easy 55 years ago to produce all these suits, then why today cannot any of these companies produce one single spacesuit that's going to function in a vacuum chamber like the one in Sandusky? I think what happened was they subjected that suit to that chamber and it had failed. And that's why they've backed out, because nobody can produce a suit that will take that kind of vacuum.
You see the testing of this Collins spacesuit, and they're in the Vomit Comet.
Yeah, that's as far as they go.
What kind of test is that? It means that they can simulate zero gravity in there, and he's supposed to be monkeying around with stuff. That has nothing to do with any part of the suit. That doesn't show you that it protects them from radiation or vacuum or any other environmental effects that are going to be out there.
Now let's read some comments that some of these people put up. Seriously, you work for Collins Aerospace and found out that they were canceling the program you are working on through Reddit? That's a bit low. Yeah, I found out about this the same way. Go, US! I used to work there as a government rep for NASA. It was neat, but you knew things were ending when they started repurposing the labs that were used for space stuff. The defense business is always good when the Pentagon is ordering lots of pizza. The EVA suits that what made me most nervous about the Artemis program. I know Collins was more focused in space EVA suits, but still. So, the only company who was given tons of money already through different programs and had a prototype backed out?
Because it didn't work.
It didn't work.
Oh, 50 years ago, the technology was so much higher.
Yeah.
You put a NASA sticker on it. They got to start manufacturing those NASA stickers that work so well.
Yeah. Well, at the time of the Chernobyl nuclear meltdown, somebody had the bright idea of saying, why don't we go to NASA and get their spacesuits so that the guys can be protected from the radiation? And then they found the radiation still affected them whether they had the spacesuits or not, because the spacesuits didn't protect against radiation. That was about 40 years ago.
Yeah, but they obviously knew that the radiation was there because Van Allen proved that.
Well, yeah, there was certainly lots of radiation. But of course, don't forget, this is what you get in the comments. It's a different sort of radiation.
Yeah, deadly. Not just the mild stuff we have on Earth.
No.
Stuff that comes off our nuclear power plants is just a very single phase type of radiation, very clean radiation. Stuff that's out there has an entire variety, and cosmic radiation itself is absolutely disrupts the DNA in your system, right? Breaks down the molecular structure of humans.
Yeah, but it's a different sort of radiation in space. It's the sort of radiation that NASA can ignore because they've never been there to find out what is there, which is why their spacesuits don't protect against it.
Well, they probably haven't even designed a detector to read the full gamut of the radiation itself.
Well, because they didn't go anywhere, they didn't need to, did they?
No.
Another thing, Collins Aerospace also produced the suits for the ISS. Those suits are leaking and getting old, because I was just watching an article yesterday on this, and they were saying that we have to change the spacesuits now. We have to replace them because they're getting old and now they're starting to leak. Well, now Collins has pulled out of this. NASA has nobody to produce those spacesuits. So now they're screwed.
Yeah. So there won't be any landing with Artemis. There won't be any gateway. There won't be any going into space beyond low Earth orbit. It'll be the normal stuff.
But get this. Axiom is still working on the spacesuits for the Mars program.
Oh, that's nice of them. Well, it's such a long way away. They can still take the money. It doesn't matter if it works or not, because nobody's going to Mars.
Well, the fantasy that we live in continues because it's so much easier to create fantasy than it is to do the real thing.
Yep, exactly.
And now what we have here in this Space News article, it says, NASA issued crossover task orders to both Axiom and Collins last July, allowing Axiom to start examining how it could adapt its lunar spacesuit for use on the ISS, and Collins to adapt its ISS spacesuit for lunar missions. Axiom has been refocused on the Artemis suit, including a recent integrated test with NASA and SpaceX to determine how the suits would integrate with the Starship lunar lander and other elements of the Artemis 3 mission. Are you guys kidding me? Here Axiom is focused on the Mars missions, and now they've been taken off of that, it seems, and now these orders are for both Axiom and Collins to allow how it could adapt its lunar spacesuit for the ISS. Well, I don't understand this, because what are they going to do now about the Mars missions? Well, I think it's like Marcus just said. They're not going anywhere. They're not going to Mars. They haven't even made it to the moon yet.
No, they haven't. They haven't made it with Artemis. The only Artemis rocket that's got to the moon was unmanned. It had dummies on board. I suppose all Artemis missions are going to have dummies on board.
Yeah, they had 3 dummies on board instead of 2.
Yeah.
I'm just looking up a little bit here, just in a little Google search, and it says, what's the next generation spacesuit for Collins? And it says, NASA tasks Collins in 2022 with developing the next generation EMU, this extra mobility spacesuit. And it's going to be lighter, more flexible, and able to accommodate more body sizes, right? And it said because the current generation of spacesuits for the ISS were designed in the 1970s when astronauts were fully male. So they're having difficulty designing a spacesuit to accommodate the structure of a woman in the spacesuit. And then the average cost of these spacesuits is between $15 and $22 million a piece.
Whoa, that's pricey.
Yeah. All of that technology and then development, they're spending all of that money for the spacesuits to develop them, when a costume designer can certainly modify a suit for male and female uses, and with flexible materials would be able to expand and shrink to accommodate different body sizes and stuff, right? The last thing I saw on the ISS is they only had, like, there's 6 or 7 people on board and they only had 3 spacesuits. I mean, if you have a leak, they can't close off any of the quadrants because they always have hoses and cables and stuff running through, so they couldn't possibly close the door. And then, of course, the environmental section is a separate pod. The bridge is on a separate level. Nobody ever goes, you never see anybody on the bridge of the ISS. You have to fly this thing, right? You have to make adjustments for it to keep it in a stable orbit.
What it really boils down to is 55 years ago, these guys had no problems with these suits. Not like this.
Nope.
I mean, how can they say they've gone anywhere when they can't even build one suit that viable.
No, then the fact of the matter is they were in an unknown environment, never had any problems with them. They took a suit that lasted for a couple of hours for Apollo 11 and turned it into 8 hour for an EVA. You never saw them replace batteries or recharge the suit in any way, shape, or form. There's no transcripts on that.
The whole thing, the whole Artemis program and the space program is becoming a joke. It's laughable. I mean, Boeing put their Starliner up on the ISS and got into all sorts of trouble. Now we can't even get any spacesuits to work.
You're literally not going anywhere if you don't have a spacesuit.
Of course you're not. No.
You're on the ground. Simple as that.
They're supposed to be on the moon by now. I mean, that was the plan. I mean, this whole moon landing stuff started back in 2004. That's 20 years ago. They haven't got any further out from the low Earth orbit.
Well, the technology is exceeding very, very slow, if not backwards.
Yeah, it's going backwards. Because now they're finding out how difficult it is to get into space.
You imagine in 1963 when they just put this program under thing, they had to put the buildings up, build all of the machinery, all of the cranes. They had to use concrete. They built the pads. They built everything. And on top of that, they built the rockets, the orbiter, the lander, the ascent module, created the suits, the whole 9 yards, had everything worked out perfectly, made it happen 6 times perfectly. One little glitch in Apollo 13. All of that equipment is sitting there. Has been built, finished, and sitting and tested.
And it all worked perfectly, didn't it? There were no problems.
That's what they claimed.
Yes, that's what they claim.
And that equipment, those buildings are still there. The launch pads are still there. The rockets, the lander, everything are sitting in museums. It's all there. The shielding that it uses for heat, all the ablative material is there for them to do. Even the videos from MIT showing how it was applied. All the chemical forms, the PDF files there are on the chemical composition of these things. And they can't do that. The fuel they used was there, powerful enough to do in one rocket. All of that stuff. The sound deadening material that they must have used in the rocket to keep those astronauts alive must be there. The guidance system could be set in on the back of your watch. Right? By comparison, the amount of computers they needed, the hundreds of tons of computer equipment that they would need, the systems like that, able to land, soft land successfully and keep humans alive in an environment. And they can't deal with this environment today.
No, well, don't forget, Scott, we got 400,000 people who worked on all this back in the 60s.
Absolutely.
They were doing the best job they could. They weren't faking anything.
Everything was handmade. Now we have computer technology that can't match it.
Yeah, and they use slide rules to design it.
And they get the guidance systems, everything else. It took 3 days to get to the moon because they figured out the way to use the least amount of fuel.
Yep.
And worked out that flight path for it that worked out perfectly.
And they had the lunar orbit rendezvous all worked out.
Come in 6,000 miles an hour, 60 miles off the thing, 1 hour rotation around the moon, the whole 9 yards. Now it takes, 6 days to get there? How does that happen? The moon get farther away?
No,
What's going on?
They're going the scenic route.
Yeah. How could they miss that much in the calculations for the most fuel-efficient flight path? But that escape velocity is just an incredible thing because it has to be exact. You're using no fuel the rest of the trip.
Yep, no, that's true.
All right, let's have a look at this. Something that I didn't really pick up on the last time I had a look at this, but this is the Apollo 17 footage here. And one of these was Harris and Schmitt, but I kind of went back a little further. And I'm looking at this and I'm going, okay, just hold on a minute here. Over here, we can clearly see where these shadows on these rocks are here. They're all on this side. There's the rock. Yep. There's the shadow. Yep. There's the rock. There's the shadow. There's the rock. There's the shadow.
Same as the mountain behind.
Yeah, exactly. So the shadow's on the left-hand side of this now.
Okay.
There's the rock. There's the shadow. So clearly, they're all on the left-hand side of this.
Yep.
So now what we do is we go a little further down here when this rover starts its little sweep. And then we get to here. Everything's on the opposite side. Now all the shadows are on the right-hand side. But then I thought, okay, let's go a little further. I wanted to go further than this. So you go, there's the shadows, they're still on the right-hand side. Watch what happens when we get to these astronauts. There's the shadows.
Look at the rock on the left-hand corner.
The shadows just changed. They're on the left-hand side now.
Yeah, okay, you were going from north to south. That's south.
Now the shadows are on the right side.
Yeah, you're facing south in Apollo 17 because the sun's coming from the east.
No, the shadows should be on this side over here, not over here.
Yeah, but now you're facing west.
The camera's just panned around 30 degrees.
Right, but if you look at the scenery at the back, that's due west.
Doesn't matter. The rock over here, even the rock here is on the opposite side.
Yeah, if you go back just to there, then that rock there is wrong. Just go forward a bit, that rock.
Yeah, see, now it's on the other side.
Yeah, but you see, you're facing southeast at that point. When you get to that mountain view at the back there, that's due west.
Yeah, okay, the astronaut shadows coming out this way, but the rock's going that way. The shadows are opposite of each other.
Yeah, well, you can see the hot spot where the light is coming from, so.
But how can you have a shadow on the left of the astronaut and you have a shadow on the rock that's maybe 20 feet away and it's on the right side of it? You see, that's my point.
Well, that is the point there because you've got a confined space, but physical dimensions of their set, you will find that same dimension in there in the press kit, the layout of their simulated set sitting there. And they're trying to show the sun coming from due east, which the astronaut's shadow would be correct, but the rock isn't.
Listen, one rock, two rocks, three rocks, and the shadows are opposite of this astronaut. It's that simple.
Right, because you've got multiple lighting coming into a hot spot in the middle.
In that pan that you've just done, do we see the lunar lander?
Oh, no, they'd be way out there.
So this is filmed from the lunar rover, isn't it?
Yeah, this is EVA-1.
Okay, because that's why the sun is quite low on the mountains. I don't see the lunar lander at this point. Maybe it was not in the picture at this time. It's supposed to have landed near to the central massif?
Wasn't the lander in front of this hill somewhere, like this big?
Yeah, it's almost dead center between the north and south massif.
Okay, well, they're a little closer to the hill then. This is interesting because this is what Marcus was saying, right? So we get over here, it looks like they just turned the light on. Now I'm going to show you, there's some really overexposed astronauts here. We're talking about the tarmac.
Yeah, tarmac is equivalent to the lunar surface in terms of reflectivity, about 8%.
And then look at this. In the video, this is when you were talking about these astronauts being completely overexposed in one shot.
Yeah.
And then they're underexposed, and as soon as the camera goes like this, pans around to this guy, now he's underexposed. Look how long his shadow is now, though.
Yeah,
it is.
The lighting is very poorly done for artificial lighting on a movie set.
Now he's lit up like a Christmas tree.
Yeah.
Or overexposed, whatever you want. But surely at some point you should see the lunar lander. I mean, it's 20 foot high. It can't be that difficult to see it.
Technically, they were supposed to be within visual range for their communication.
That's right.
You'll see the diagram, and it shows you where the X marks the spot where the lander is.
Okay, so it's in front of the North Massif.
It's almost in the middle.
That mountain in the film that you're showing, Robert, that features quite often in the photographs. And you see the astronauts where you've got a sort of a small bump on the right and then quite a big mountain, which is probably the North Massif. See where the mountain comes down and you've got a little bump here. Now that particular feature comes up quite often in photographs. You see, and the lander is about here. In one picture it's about here, and then you see another picture where you've got the lunar rover and it's about in the same place.
But they moved it down to that end of the set. And you did that when you did your presentation, Fact and Fiction, right?
That's right, yes. And I was challenged on that by one of the NASA shills who said, oh, he doesn't know that it was bumpy there and the lander would have been below the viewpoint. Well, I think you made an excellent point that they had to keep the lander within sight, at least to be able to transmit pictures. They were filming it on video. It had to be direct line of sight. And they had to see where the bloody lander was. If they had a problem, they know where to go when they needed to get back.
That's the problem you have with the rover, because the equipment on the rover was supposed to be able to calculate the distance and direction they were away from the LEM itself.
That's right, yeah.
And they're supposed to have a computer to calculate that, and the computer measures the rotational speed and direction of the wheels. And it all has to go through a computer. So it measures how far the steering is turned on the wheels itself. And now it has four-wheel steering. So then it calculates how many times the wheels rotate when the wheels are turned a certain position. And it calculates not only the total distance they traveled, but it calculates how far they are away and the direction from the LEM. Well, when in actual fact, some people stated that when they were looking at it because they thought there was a compass on the dashboard, and NASA doesn't know what a sundial is, so they call it a sun shadow device, is what they call it.
Right.
And it sits on the dash and it literally lifts up so it's level and has a little post in the middle, and you put the post up and then you dial the dial around because the sun is coming from the east. So the shadow is sitting on the west, and that shows you the direction you are traveling from. But in the middle of that, they have three little gauges that show you range and distance and everything else. And the computer is supposed to display the distance away from there, when in actual fact, that's nothing more than a gear-driven counter off the wheels, just like any other odometer in a 1960s car.
Yeah, same thing.
So you can't change those numbers because they're locked together by gears.
Yeah.
Right? It can only count forward or backwards if you're going in reverse. Going backwards, it would count it down or count it up. But when you're traveling back towards the LEM, it's not going to count down and show you the range. But of course, they claim it is. They claim that there's a computer on board to do that. Well, first of all, a computer in the 1960s is going to be the size of a house to do those calculations. It's going to need a good sized generator because you're going to need at least a 200 amp service to run all of that equipment. Yep. Then you're going to need 40 guys with swipe cards on there. But they claim this computer is underneath, right along the frame rail across the front of the rover. And of course, I have looked at that frame rail and there's nothing there.
No, of course not. I mean, NASA can say what it likes because nobody can actually challenge it. But you're challenging it. You're saying they've got a computer on the rover to calculate how far away it is from the lander. And you're saying it can't do it. So NASA's lying to us again.
And not only that, the guy that stated that that was an actual compass up there, now you need a magnetosphere around the moon.
Well, there isn't one.
Yeah, how do you get north, south, east, or west if you don't have anything for a compass to calculate?
It was all fake anyway.
And you see now, if you look at documents on the moon, you'll see that they have the North and South Pole as we look at it, which is the North Pole is at the top of what we view, and the South Pole's at the bottom. And then if you look at other ones, it now has a celestial pole, which is in the middle because it's rotating around. And they're claiming that would create the magnetosphere because it's rotating on the celestial pole. But their grid longitude and latitude is based on the other pole. And that's where their landing sites are based on. That's where all their calculations are based on, not the celestial pole. So again, having a compass up there doesn't work. The reason why it has north, south, east, and west is because it's a sundial or a sun shadow device, as NASA calls it.
Here's something else that I find very strange. This is the video. It's called On the Shoulder of Giants. This is Apollo 17. Now, look at how they've molded this in.
Well, it was raining and the ground got a little dark, so it doesn't match the hills anymore.
How can this hill, look at the color. Again, it's all pillowy, so is this. But look how they blended it right into this surface here. They had to have airbrushed this with the optical printer.
Oh, look at the junk right there. There's a couple pieces of equipment. If you zoom in on that, you'll see the H pattern off a hydraulic device like a tractor frame or whatever. You zoom in, that's off a piece of machinery that runs off hydraulics because you can see the H pattern where the quick connects go on for the hydraulics. It's just unbelievable.
surely there'd be more craters in that view. I mean, that's showing, we're told, about 100 yards back from that viewpoint to the mountains behind. There's only one crater.
Well, look at how fast the detail disappears. When they were blending that in, they brought it right up to the edge of the crater. Then there's no detail in any of it.
Yeah.
Doesn't this look like a dump truck has dumped this? Look at these lines here. This is very strange, but you don't see it over here. You just see it here in this.
Yeah. And those weird reflections on the top right. I mean, what are those supposed to be?
Artificial light.
Well, it's not lens flare, because Hasselblad cameras don't have lens flare like that. They're much better made.
No, but a giant spotlight does. Well, you can see the hot spot. Look at it. Look at it on the rocks there on the left-hand side. Huge hot spot.
It's ludicrous. Do we expect to believe that is the lunar surface? Ha, ha. Cinder Lake, more like.
Yeah, it is really amazing how they blend this in, though, isn't it? Look at that. You have this gray of this mountain comes right in, keeps going, right up to the edge of this crater right here.
Oh. Looking at how Hollywood did these things back in the 1930s, they used to have big pictures above and in front of the camera that would show the sky and the clouds and all the rest of it as the action was going on underneath. So it was sort of putting in an artificial sky. It's the same sort of thing. They had it painted onto a big piece of glass, which the camera would pick up, and it would appear to be the same scene. Looks like they're doing exactly the same thing here, but they didn't paint them very well. Artists in Hollywood could do a very, very good scene on a piece of glass, and it was placed just in front of the camera so that the camera would shoot underneath it, but it would include the sky on the piece of glass above the camera. So when it was filmed, it would all appear to be one shot.
Where was NASA when they first started working with Disney?
Dear old Uncle Walt was a big consultant, wasn't he? He and Uncle Werner.
And Woody Woodpecker, don't forget.
Oh, don't forget Woody Woodpecker, yes.
Yeah. Downhill all the way.
They'd fall out of the sky, wouldn't they? Oh, dear.
It's just amazing anytime you pull a photograph up, the amount of stuff that's actually in there, because the hot spots are there. Apollo 17 was very, very wet. And of course, they still had to shoot it because they had to show off the wet flag and everything else. They would have dried it out, but it's an American symbol, so it needs to be shot. But when you look at the different EVAs out there for the days they're shooting, you can see the ground is actually drying out. When you get farther on, it's quite dry. The footprints are not exact in the ground anymore. The ground matches the background mountains that they put in, the close match to it. When they step out, it's very wet.
Oh, by the way, you know the film Fly Me to the Moon? They should have used Kubrick. That's a great line, that one.
Hopefully, they have been watching our videos. They refer to some of the stuff because when Space Force was doing that, they obviously had been watching our videos. You know, when they're going around and the medical guys just got some duct tape to do the suit up when they get shot and stuff like that. It's just hilarious what they did in there, right?
Well, hopefully we're going to see a nice bit of moon rock as well on the set. You know, it'll probably look a bit like that. And then we'll see if Scarlett Johansson can come up with a really plausible story, because she's the one who's brought in to fake the moon landings. I mean, this is a major Hollywood film. It's got Magic Mike in it as well, Channing Tatum. Anyway, so it's almost as if they're laughing at NASA by producing this film. I mean, if they really thought it was real, why did they even bother thinking about a story like that? No, it's because Hollywood know perfectly well that what we've been saying and what a lot of people have been saying is perfectly correct. They faked the whole thing because they couldn't get there. And if anybody can prove us wrong on that, please do so. Don't make any ridiculously ad hominem attacks on us. Produce the evidence to show that NASA landed humans on the moon. And if you can't do it, you'll have to agree that they faked it. Faked it.